Okay, so I have talked about commitment in other audios and blogs, so we'll take that one next. What does the experience, the spontaneous of commitment, experience of commitment? Sorry for the background noise there. What does that signal? The spontaneous experience of commitment signals something. What does it experience? What does it signal? When I take actions that are in alignment with my other motivations, my innate motivations and inspiration, but have not yet been effective. I haven't effectively produced the outcome that I'm targeting. But the actions that I'm taking are in alignment with producing an outcome that really is motivating and inspiring, then I experience commitment. And there are other words I could use here. You could say motivation. When I take the action that motivates me, I experience motivation. But before taking the action, I can experience motivation. So what I actually get is like that momentum, and I'm calling that commitment. We could use different words, but that works for me. So there's an inner confirmation or validation of moving in the direction that is right for me, targeting an outcome that is appropriate for me, that really fits with my motivations. So through my experience of commitment, it is easy for me to continue gathering skill or developing skill and gathering resources. Why? In order to eventually be effective, at which time I would experience what? Pride. So because I'm acting in alignment, then I'm going to experience commitment when I start acting. If I get disappointed, I'm still motivated, I'm still committed, because the more I try, I'll go back to my really silly example or simple example of a little kid shooting basketball hoops, shooting a ball, trying to throw a ball into a basketball net. If that's a really good fit with their motivations, the more they do it, the more committed they'll be. They're going to love doing it. Even if they only succeed 1 out of 10 times or 3 out of 100 times or whatever, they're going to do it over and over and over. The more they do it, the more they want to do it. That's commitment. If eventually their motivation changes, like they're not so excited about, throwing basketball hoops, well, that's because their innate motivations have changed. They're proud when they first developed the skill. 2 years later, 10 years later, you can do it and you don't really care. It doesn't necessarily produce shame. But if you're a 40-year-old or a 14-year-old and you're throwing 100 straight balls out of 100 into the hoop, then you're going to be like, I'm wasting my time. This is boring. There's going to be at least an element of shame because you need a challenge. You need something fun, something that's an appropriate match. You also don't want to target something that's way out of your range. You do want to have, if you can control the height of the net and so on, you do want to set a target that's a fun match for you. That's a good match for you, meaning that it's fun for you to make your attempts. You'll be disappointed, you'll experience commitment, and you keep doing it. And then when you have a certain level of success, in regard to the basketball analogy, you get further away from the net, you raise the net higher, you do something to make it a little bit harder, to increase the level of difficulty, or else you'll get bored, or the child would get bored. So the fact that there will be many small experiments, including some experiments that have disappointing results, that's relatively trivial when I'm acting in alignment with my innate motivations. Yeah, there'll be a lot of experiments. Some will be disappointing, and so what? When I'm studying something that's just really intriguing to me, I don't remember the 10 pages that I looked through that didn't have the fact that I was looking for that I'm really interested in. When I find the thing I'm interested in, that's all that, registers. Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. And then I move on to the next detail. And that's a great way to learn. That's, an intelligent way to learn. And the fact that, did I look through 10 pages or 3 pages or 15 pages before I found the thing I wanted? Well, if I'm acting in alignment with my motivations, I don't count the pages that it took for me to find the thing. I'm not like, oh my God, this is horrible. That's what people do when they're, being externally disciplined to learn something. When they're learning something out of their own, spontaneous intelligence, they just plow through, the process. They have a lot of commitment. They have a lot of motivation, momentum. So they plow through the process. They don't make excuses. They don't go, oh, well, I need to take out the trash first. Oh, well, I want to make that one phone call first. Oh, maybe I should do this first. They don't postpone homework if they are really eager and, interested in the content of the homework. In fact, they'll go out of their way to read things or study things that are more interesting or even only moderately interesting to them in order to avoid things that they find really confusing or, really discouraging, let's say. Meaning that their success, it's off track of what's appropriate for them, and it's just arduous and frustrating for them to attempt to do it. So they'll try to avoid doing it. Why? Because it's not a good match for them, or it's not a good method for them to learn the thing. Maybe they need to slow down, use a different method. Maybe that whole Common Core thing is, something that they can learn to use after they learn to do the math. So learn to do the math, get the right answer, and then you can go back and learn the Common Core method. And of course, you'll be bored at having to go through it, but you can go through it and do the long way and, get the right answer on the test. And yeah, I got the right answer on the test, good for me. But there's no satisfaction in terms of getting the right answer, because I'm talking about this Common Core math thing. Hopefully you're familiar with what I'm talking about. If they're being graded on the process that they use, then they don't really get any satisfaction out of conforming. They're like, okay, I'm done with the test. I got 100 or I got whatever, passing grade. I'm relieved. I'm now done with that. Okay, good. I'm done with that homework. All right, now let's do stuff that's, important. or important to me. I've gotten rid of the things that are important to other people, teachers or whoever. Now I'm going to do the stuff that's important to me. Finally. So back to when I'm acting in alignment or back to the issue of how closely an activity is in alignment with my motivations. The intensity of my disappointment confirms the importance of my motivation. Put it this way. If I'm motivated to do something and I fail to do it, then I'm going to be disappointed. If I'm really motivated to do something and I fail to do it, then I'm going to be really disappointed. If I kind of want to do something and I fail to do it, I'll be kind of disappointed. The lower the intensity of the disappointment, the less interest I have in producing that result. The more disappointed I am, the more that's a sign that I'm on the right track. That's distinct from frustration. The more I'm disappointed, the more that confirms that I'm acting in alignment with my motivations, even though I've failed. So, the more I'm disappointed by a particular result, like I keep producing it and it's a very intense disappointment, well, the more motivated I'm going to be to continue to generate more commitment by taking more action in pursuit of my motivation. Disappointment is commitment. The extent of the disappointment is the extent of the commitment. They're actually kind of the same thing. My disappointment is how I recognize my actual commitment. I'm really disappointed by that. That must mean I'm really committed to it. I'm really motivated to produce that result. And I experience the commitment by taking action, especially if I'm ineffective when I take the action. I take the action, I feel that commitment, that hope, you might say. It's not just any hope, it's a hope in relation to a motivation that inspires me. So that's commitment, that's enthusiasm. And then I fail, and I feel disappointed. That's commitment too. The motivation is like all the more clear. Keep at it. Or as soon as I can, keep at it. Maybe I find a new method. Maybe I change the height of the basketball net or move closer or whatever. But disappointment is commitment in the case of acting in alignment with my innate motivations. As I experiment, the momentum of my commitment grows. Whatever my results are, even especially if I'm failing, then the momentum of my commitment grows as I experiment. And that propels me toward being effective. I don't start as effective in many cases. I have to develop that. I have to experiment. I have to see what works for me. I have to develop my perceptiveness. I have to develop my strength, my coordination, all these different things. I have to develop my skills. I have to practice. And then I get better by practicing. And that propels me toward effectiveness. Another word for that stage of experience that I have been calling commitment or enthusiasm would be determination. Here, though, I mean a spontaneous determination. It's an inner spontaneous experience of determination, commitment, enthusiasm, rather than an obsessiveness designed to attract social validation and avoid social criticism. So there's a kind of, people will use the word determination sometimes in regard to what's really an obsession with attracting social validation and avoiding social criticism. So commitment, how I'm using the word here, does not need external validation. It is entirely subjective, an internal experience, a manifestation of acting in alignment with my innate commitments, my innate motivations. It is an internal, spontaneous experience resulting from acting in alignment with one's inner motivations. Note that I'm not referring to the social activity of expressing a commitment or making a commitment verbally. That is a distinct topic. I think I will say a little more about it here. There may or may not be some social display of the inner experience of commitment, that spontaneous thing. Maybe people notice it. Maybe I acknowledge it in general or in private or whatever to particular people. Maybe almost anyone who's observing a person who's experiencing commitment can recognize that that person is experiencing a surge of commitment, in regard to pursuing a particular result. Wow, they really seem dedicated to that. So if we use the word dedication, that's even more a fit than determination, because sometimes people use the word determination in regard to something that they're not, an externally imposed, external discipline goal. That's more about compliance or obedience. But dedication, devotion, those are things that arise spontaneously to a goal that really inspires me. I take action and I experience devotion and I'm surprised by it. That's a sign. So there's a particular result that inspires me. There's a particular course of action that I feel hope about. So as I explore that course of action, I experience a surge of commitment, of determination, devotion, dedication, hope, even enthusiasm. So the hope is that this specific method will fit the result. So hope's a little bit of a different shade there, because hope is usually about the method, right? It's not about the result. The result I'm committed to. When I do something that hasn't worked yet, but I think it could, then I experience hope. The bigger the hope, the more of a sense of confidence I have in the possibility that that method will be successful. Whether immediately or after an hour or a week or whatever, I'm eventually going to use this method to get my result. So I experience hope. Do I have to have all the skills and all the resources to use the method? No. The hope is independent of, having already been successful. I just have that hope that this method is going to work for me, produce the result. I'm not chasing pride, but I can have that sense of, wow, when I do that, I am going to feel pride. I really can already feel that, the hints of that as I have little successes along the way. So those little successes along the way, that's commitment. Little failures along the way, that's also commitment. When someone says, what someone says or does not say about the experience of commitment is completely distinct from experiencing commitment. So experiencing commitment either happens or not. Comments about commitment either happen or not. Two distinct things. In contrast with the experience of commitment, when we take actions that are not in alignment with our actual motivations, the natural signal of that is what? What is the experience that happens when we take actions that aren't in conformity to our actual motivations? Guilt. Guilt is the signal. Guilt is distinct from regret, by the way, and that regret can develop in regard to an unintentional result. I did something, I didn't mean to do that, I experienced regret. Guilt is different. Guilt is when I'm doing something that I know I would rather not be doing. It's not a fit for my actual motivations, so I experience guilt just by doing it. If I'm effective, then shame is added on top of it. But if I'm doing something that doesn't fit with my motivations, I experience guilt. That can be the signal to me that this thing that I've been doing doesn't fit with my motivations. So sincere regret, just to make a passing reference again to regret. When I sincerely, spontaneously experience regret, that corresponds to having a good intention. I have a good intention, something else happens, and I experience regret. That's not guilt. Regret is just a form of sincerity. That was sincerely my good intention, and then something else happened, so I experienced regret. Guilt results from taking actions that one has been intimidated into taking or pressured into taking, and that are contrary to one's actual motivations. So, by the way, there's no blame or fault in experiencing guilt. Somebody has, if I do something that produces the experience of guilt, it's because I've been scared, I've been terrorized, I've been bullied, I've been pressured, maybe even tricked. So we may claim sincerity or inspiration in regard to some activity, but what we claim is distinct from what we experience. So guilt is the natural signal of repulsion. I don't like what I'm doing, so I experience guilt. If I keep doing it, I keep experiencing guilt. If I stop doing it, then I have relief from guilt. If I do things that are in alignment with my motivation, then I have commitment. There can be even courage or pride or whatever just in doing things in alignment with my motivation. However, the pinnacle of pride might be when I'm successful, right? So, oh boy, back to guilt. So guilt is a type of repulsion. When someone is pressured or intimidated into doing something which they are not ready to do, maybe it's not their current priority that really is a good fit for them at that time, then they'll experience anxiety. And if they act in accord with the social pressure to do the thing they're not ready to do, they'll experience guilt. If someone's pressured into doing something that they would never have any spontaneous attraction to doing, they're just conforming. And if they conform, if they take the action they're pressured to do, and it's not in alignment with their innate motivation, then they'll experience guilt. If they're pressured to do something that is in alignment with their innate motivations, will they experience guilt? No. They'll actually still experience commitment. They've been pressured. They do something in alignment with their motivations. They experience commitment. The fact that they were pressured is actually somewhat trivial. The point is that typically people wouldn't do things spontaneously that are out of alignment with their motivations. So the only time people will experience guilt generally is when they have been pressured to do something that they wouldn't have otherwise done. So what people say about the entire process at any point in the process or after the process, whatever, that's distinct from their spontaneous experience. What people say is distinct from what people feel. Since guilt arises, or can be distinct from what people feel. So since guilt arises in the context of social pressure or intimidation, it is extremely likely for there to be some social displays claiming sincerity or loyalty. I'm doing the right thing because I've been pressured to do something, and I'm, conforming to the pressure. So that's the right thing. I've been told that it's the right thing. I'm doing the thing I've been told is the right thing, and so I'm probably going to present, well, but I'm doing the right thing. Even if I experience guilt, I'm going to still have that, but I'm doing the right thing, aren't I? Don't you think it's right what I'm doing? There's going to be that uncertainty, insecurity, maybe anxiety. So being loyal to someone else's preferences or interests is distinct from being loyal to one's own inspiration and motivation. Usually when people use the term loyalty, they're talking about loyalty to some external thing. They're not talking about loyalty to themselves. They're not talking about integrity. Integrity, to me, is about awareness of my actual motivations and interests and then acting in accord with them. I do that, I experience commitment, and when I'm successful, I experience pride. That's integrity. That whole realm is integrity. Integrity, by the way, is related to the word integration or having it all together, as in whole, as in complete, as in holy, as in healthy. When I act in a way that is healthy for me, then I experience commitment. And when I'm effective, I experience pride. When I act in a way that's in integrity for me, it's in alignment with my actual motivations and inspirations, then when I take action, I get commitment as a result. And when I'm successful, I get pride. In contrast, when someone experiences shame, it's not unusual for them to exert social pressure on others so that others also conform to the same activity and produce the same circumstantial outcome. By circumstantial outcome, I mean external outcome, not necessarily the subjective experience of shame. Maybe, but here, do the same thing that I'm doing because I don't want to, but at least it's kind of soothes me a little bit to have other people doing it along with me. So let's do this together, and then, we'll all go down together. So if somebody's in a self-sabotage mode, they often want to group together with others in that same mode or using that same method of self-sabotage. They avoid people who criticize that method or say, you seem really guilty every time you do that. Do you think that's really good for you? So when there's a momentum of shame, it's going to bring certain people together, that share that methodology that they've all been pressured to do or that they all have chosen to do out of programming, out of being frightened, and they're not allowed to do 15 things. They've been kind of, programmed with reverse psychology. Only losers do drugs. What's that a message to do? Well, it's a suggestion in the hypnotic sense. It is a suggestion for people to use drugs. Only users lose drugs. Is that how they say it in the billboards from the 80s? So it's a suggestion that people who feel, disappointed or guilty already, etc., they use more or they use drugs. What drugs? Well, maybe they use medical drugs. Maybe they use illegal drugs. That's a different issue. So we talked about social pressure in regard to an outcome that doesn't inspire whoever's being pressured. So typically, if someone submits to the pressure, if they conform, and then is eventually effective at producing the outcome that someone else pushed on them, then what will their experience be? Shame. The one who did the pushing probably already experienced shame. That's at least possible, and will once again experience another layer of shame once the person they've bullied is successful and experiences shame. The bully is also going to experience shame. The one who's compliant and obedient to the social pressure will experience shame. The one who applied the social pressure will experience shame. So the kind of thing that can happen is that people kind of group together or end up forming dynamics or momentums where they bring shame to the surface more and more intense shame. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can look kind of ugly and chaotic from the outside, and it can be pretty, because shame involves distress. It sucks to go through it. People may resist it at the same time as they're actively pursuing it in terms of their actual behavior, but there's a lot of conflict for them in the process. They experience a lot of tension, repulsion, internal repulsion, like self-condemnation, like guilt-tripping themselves, like shaming themselves, or just feeling shame. So that mirroring of shame between two or more people can bring them together in grieving. So why are they grieving? It's because they're not acting in alignment with their innate motivations. So they're grieving. They come together, to create this theater in which shame can arise and grief can arise and so on. And once the pressure has been applied and then somebody's done the thing, that they've been pressured to do and they're effective, a couple results are possible. There can be an intense propulsion between the people involved. Once the outcome is produced, there can be a real intense repulsion, resentment, and so on. A sense of betrayal. You tricked me, you deceived me. Rather than pride, there can be a distressed resentment. Because why? The other person, the one who was pressured, did did not appreciate the good intentions, alleged good intentions of the one doing the pressuring. I'm trying to save this person. I'm trying to rescue them, and they're not thanking me. In other words, if someone is acting with the desire to be thanked, to be reassured, to be validated, they're not acting out of interest in the other person's actual result. They're acting selfishly to target validation. But what's really in the background is distress, grieving, shame. They're not even on the right page, so to speak, in their own focus. They have a background of discontent. They take the actions that then produce them, being resentful of the other person for not thanking them more. And that resentment is a kind of distress. They create a theater that allows them to have some privacy. They repel other people. They push people away. They have privacy now. They've got resentment. They've got the background of distress. They've got the background of grief. And maybe they go, what would be in alignment with my actual motivations? What do I feel commitment towards when I do it? What have I felt pride about when I've done it? What am I interested in? They get off the subject of other people and what other people want and what other people think and what's going on for other people. And they are going to focus more, perhaps suddenly, on what works for me. For the one who's been targeted with social pressure, they may ask, why didn't anyone protect me? I've been pushed, I've been prodded, I went along with it, I felt guilt through the process, perhaps I was effective at some point and then felt shame at being effective at this thing I wasn't really ever aligned with in the beginning. And why didn't anyone protect me from the pressure of, the bully or the one doing the intimidation or encouraging that kind of conformity? Here's the right thing to do. Here's what people should do. So you should do it. And when you do it, you should feel happy about it. And you should thank me for telling you to do this thing, even though it might be completely inappropriate for you at this time. So let's review a little bit. When I act in alignment with my motivations, that produces the experience of commitment, and it gives me access eventually to pride. When I've been socially pressured or influenced to act contrary to my motivations, that produces the experience of guilt. If I'm effective in doing whatever I've been intimidated into doing, then the natural signal of that would be shame. Notice that people will often claim to experience guilt in relation to failing to succeed at some task. They say that their guilt is in relation to failing. However, in contrast, consider that the reality is that the experience of guilt is not produced by the failure, but by the attempt itself. And then they use the failure as an excuse or justification. When there's an outcome of failure, then somebody takes the opportunity to justify a display of their inner guilt by saying that they are guilty because of the failure. But that's not necessarily true. The failure is, in fact, a preference of theirs over being effective, and the failure gives them a justification for displaying the guilt, displaying the disappointment, the distress. Oh, I was ineffective. Now I want, comfort, and will you now let me off of the hook, since I can't do this. This is something I can't do. They don't say it's something I don't want to do or that I'm intentionally sabotaging or failing at, whether or not that's true. They'll say, I can't do this. I'm so frustrated. And they are. Why? Because they're doing something they don't even want to be doing. That's got to be frustrating, right? They're conforming to social pressure. The more they fail, the more they have an excuse to display some kind of emotion. If they're actually effective, they don't have any excuse to display a repulsive emotion. Generally speaking, in a context of social pressure in which assertiveness is not welcome, pretenses and apologies are common. When we see lots of pretenses and apologies, that might be a signal of social pressure. In particular, social pressure in which assertiveness is not welcome. What do I mean by assertiveness? I mean sharing one's actual experience displaying one's real motivations, like one's real interests. What am I really interested in? That involves assertiveness, right? So if assertiveness is not welcome because that violates the program of how to be a good person according to whatever model of good person, then assertiveness is a problem. There needs to be, conformity, loyalty. That's the big, value of the person. From the perspective of the person exerting the social pressure, they want loyalty and conformity. They don't want assertiveness. They don't want, inner clarity. They don't want integrity and commitment and pride. Pride's bad. You shouldn't experience pride ever. Pride bad. No. Stop. So Jar Jar is like, oh, don't experience things that don't do things that make you feel pride. You're going to go to hell, or you're making me jealous, or we're going to punish you if you do that. We're going to criticize you and condemn you. So don't be assertive, because if you're assertive, we are going to bully you. So that's the context that somebody might, that's the social context that somebody might experience ongoingly. And in that context, they're going to develop certain habits of behavior and communication as far as what they say they can't do or they won't do or they don't have time to do, or whatever it is. They're going to have like a kind of a natural resistance. And certainly they'll have a resistance to anything that is in alignment with their motivations, because that's disruptive to their whole context of loyalty, conformity, obedience, and self-sacrifice, or self. It could be self-sabotage, but putting the interests of others before oneself. Their holiness, their saintlyhood, their alleged holiness. It's actually the opposite of real wholeness and holiness, but the idea of getting socially validated for being perfect. So there's that anxiety about being perfect according to other people's, presumptions about what perfection would be. So if that's been a social context of somebody throughout, large portions of their life, they're going to be terrified of disappointing the person who's pressuring them. If I've been targeted with, bullying a lot, I'm going to be terrified of getting more criticism or harassment. I'm going to be terrified of disappointing or angering. Really, the issue is I don't want to anger the person who's pressuring or bullying me, because I expect them to unleash wrath on me that I may think I'm not stable enough to handle that wrath. So I need to defer to them. I need to conform. I need to avoid disappointing them because I want to avoid them being angry at me. The real issue is I'm afraid of their anger. I'm afraid of their criticism, their harassment, their punishment. So if I've been used to people pressuring most of my life, then I assume that anyone who's interacting with me is pressuring me, because I'm used to being pressured. So if somebody's interacting with me, they must be pressuring me, right? Or that's the presumption. That's the thing I'm going to test. I'm going to presume that to be the case. I'm going to test it. I'm going to accuse them of stuff, like pressuring me, just to see their response. That's really my default orientation to people, is I'm expecting to be pressured. I'm expecting to be intimidated. I'm expecting to be bullied. So I relate to people in general as if they're victimizing me, as if they're bullying me, as if they're intimidating me, they're pressuring me. Why do I interact with people as if they're pressuring me? Well, one thing would be if I have a background of guilt and shame, then it can be useful to always presume that people are pressuring me, because some people are going to be like repulsed by that. They're going to be like, why are you always accusing me of stuff? That's weird. I don't like it. I'm out of here. And that if other people are, if we're pushing them away by always accusing them of pressuring us and relating to them as intimidating us, bullying us, if that, you might not even say that pushing away, but it could be pushing them away. It certainly doesn't draw them nearer in general. So if we're pushing others away, then they aren't close to us. They don't get to see our background experience of anxiety, shame, guilt, and so on. We get to maintain privacy. Even if we have social structures in our midst, like a relationship or a job or whatever that's really private, that keeps me secluded from people, that keeps me in an emotional shell or an emotional shelter, then, well, let me say it this way. I kind of lost my train of thought. If I do things that keep me within a familiar shelter, that fits with having a sanctuary in which I have the opportunity to gradually experience anxiety, guilt, shame without a lot of social observation of me. I withdraw from certain other people or all other people. I have a shelter. That shelter can be a certain kind of job or a certain kind of just life circumstance, a certain kind of relationship where there's no or very little emotional sharing, vulnerability, so on. So in that shelter, I can have an opportunity to recognize, background of distress and release some of that, relax some of that, or all of that suddenly, right now. So I could be so accustomed to the dynamic of being pressured that I habitually presume that dynamic to be present by default. If someone's interacting with me, I presume they're pressuring me, they're harassing me, or they're going to. I'm concerned that they would. I'm concerned that they're going to get angry at me, they're going to criticize me and condemn me and punish me, so I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to trigger anger. So the next section will be on trust and anxiety.